Hi there. I like to think of this channel as being a think tank for Gnosticism rather than this is what Gnosticism is and you have to believe in what I think about it. Because the whole point of philosophy is that you're asking questions and you're thinking about things rather than laying down a law about something, um, declaring something to be the truth. Like it or lump it sort of thing. So I don't want to do that because as a philosopher, I want as I say, you're more into discussing or thinking deeply about something, about who is Jesus, what is Gnosticism, what is the cosmos, what is the meaning of life, whatever, like some philosophers do, and and I suppose this is kind of like the intellectual realm, as it were, asking the questions, thinking about, who Jesus is and what Jesus is and how Jesus is and when Jesus was and or is. Um, and so that's kind of the intellectual plane. And then you come down here to the fire plane, which is represented by the four holy words, I love you, God. So you're you fanatically believe in God and you fanatically love God. That part is not argument. You kind of forbid argument about that. Um, and then the other side of it, of loving God in a sort of kind of a bubble of ecstatic love, is loving thy neighbor as thyself, and indeed loving thy neighbor as God. And of course, this is challenged by your neighbor moaning at you about your dog that's gone and dug up its, some valuable plants in your neighbor's garden. And you want to kick the dog and you want to punch the neighbor, even though you're clearly in the, it's clearly your responsibility and you've got to pay for the damage. And it's hard to see God in the neighbor. It's harder to see God in the dog. And generally, you want to despair of existence and shout and get drunk or whatever about what's just happened. But that's a kind of like, so that brings you on to the kind of that's the emotional part, the water part, and then the earth part is surviving this world on an ethical basis. So you have to survive the incident of your dog ruining your neighbour's garden, but you have to do it in a non-predatory, non-exploitative, non-manipulative, non-harming way, and which preserves, your neighbour, and preserves your own relationship with your neighbour, which it is important to preserve, having come together as neighbours. But you need to survive this world, and things happen, don't they? Dogs do what dogs do, and neighbours get cross, and you get cross, but you all have to kind of resolve it in the end, rather than taking to the, rather than getting out your guns and shooting at each other. So the three things that one might be fanatical about is surviving this world on an ethical basis, um, loving thy neighbor as thyself and as God, seeing God in thy neighbor, and loving God, him, her, itself. And then everything else is up for philosophical speculation, as in theological things, and is soul transcendental? Do we have a soul? All these other questions of theology occupy the mind, perhaps distract the mind from worrying about material things, and the mind is focused instead on questions of theology, which perhaps have absolutely no bearing on anything at all, really. But they sort of do, because I think that the narrative that you come up with and the philosophical questions that you perhaps answer do actually dictate or colour the love that you have for God, and maybe dictate the way that you live in this world on an ethical basis. So it is relevant. Theology is relevant. It's not just glass bead games or mind games. It does have a practical application in the end, and you become clear about certain things. You have a clear and distinct idea, to quote Descartes, about God and the origin of God and the purpose of God, etc., etc. Um, so this whole discussion arises out of a very interesting lecture about the Gospel of Judas, which I saw on the Gnostic network. I'll put the link in the description below so you can have a look at that. It's very, very good. And not that I'm a big fan of the Gospel of Judas, because it's a polemic against Orthodox Christianity and Orthodox Christians. And I always think that polemics are sort of written by people who are insecure about what they believe. And maybe the writer of the Gospel of Judas is sort of harboring ideas that maybe Orthodox Christianity is correct, and Gnosticism is a bit of a mishmash of ideas. And whereas Orthodox Christianity is a very consistent, rational set of beliefs. And why are they still going on about Gnosticism when they should be embracing orthodoxy? So I'm always worried about polemics and people that get really angry with other people about their religions. Does that indicate that you are insecure with your own religion? And that may be the case, and that's something that you've got to sort out within yourself rather than taking it out on other people. And the other thing about polemics is although you might say God exists and I love God and that's the absolute truth. If people don't believe in God, then that doesn't mean to say they're inferior to you at all. And I won't say that, and I won't even believe it. Well, I won't even think it, or try not to think it. Well, I've just thought it now, haven't I? So if you think that other Christians are wrong and your Christianity is right, it's like that's almost like sort of go and flagellate yourself, because I won't have that. I won't have that, and I won't have the implications of saying that either. So there may be such a thing as the truth, but I won't say that I have the truth and you don't have the truth. And I'll try not to think it because then you start to get prejudiced, and bigotry arises from that, which I won't have in myself anyway. And bigotry is the cause of a lot of suffering in the world, is it not? And we're supposed to survive this world on an ethical basis. So if we allow bigotry to take over, then we're surviving this world, but not on an ethical basis. So, by attacking other people for their beliefs or their ethnic background or whatever. But the Gospel of Judas certainly have me thinking about things, and its rejection of the Eucharist, rejection of the idea of sacrifice as being anything to do with Christianity. And I was thinking, well, if you reject the concept of sacrifice, and the sacrifice creating a new covenant between God and man, then of course you must reject the passion, you must reject the resurrection, you must reject all references to the passion and resurrection in the Gospels. You must reject the virgin birth as well, as being you must reject the idea of Jesus being sort of born into the material world, and to die in the material world in order to spiritualize the world at a later stage, when the second coming So you also have to get rid of all the apocalyptic elements in Christianity as well, to a large degree. So what what on earth are you left with if you've just rejected most of the charisma of Christianity? Does Christianity work without the death of Christ and the resurrection of Jesus? Does it? Is there any point in being a Christian or having Christianity at all? And because you have to make certain assumptions if your religion is going to work, and if you're going to live by your religion, you've got to believe in certain things that are absolutely true and are sort of non-negotiable. So I was thinking about this very deeply, and it occurred to me that, which is probably not an original, well, definitely not original idea, but to sort of simplify Christianity and to simplify the Jesus narrative to an extent where this would comply with the basic theology of Gnosticism, that there are two gods, a god of this world and a god of the next world, or the transcendental world. And we must reject and repudiate the god of this world um, as part of our process of remembering who we really are, which or what we are as soul, in relation to the transcendental God. And so it occurred to me, that how could you have the gospel? How could you create a gospel that reflected basic Gnostic ideas? And so basically, what you're really saying is that you have soul, which is represented by this red line, and soul is captured by the demiurge, the devil, or Satan, Rex Mundi. And soul is brought down into the lower worlds of increasing materialism. So as the soul is brought down to the lower worlds, it increasingly forgets its nature, and as a result of this, becomes more and more materialistic, and sees the existence in materialistic terms, consciously. So it loses its soul consciousness and embraces materialism instead, and either conscious or unconscious. But I have to sort of briefly digress here. People talk about Satanism. Well, Satanism actually it's sort of it is spiritual because it's a conscious recognition that I'm a material girl in a material world, and rather than people just being unconsciously materialistic or unaware that they are materialistic, Satanism, embraces the idea of materialism. It says, look, I'm a materialistic person, and this is a material world, and I have to survive in it. We have to survive in it by any means possible. And I try and respect other people's will if I can, but when all push comes to shove, I'm going to think of myself first, and why shouldn't I? And so this conscious choice to be selfish, if you like, and spiritual, is that could be kind of the spirituality of Satanism, as it were. Um, so it's not you could reject a material world, which is sort of hypocritical and impossible, or you could just be a bozo going through life without thinking about anything, just being materialistic, or you could be a Satanist and be consciously materialistic, which is kind of a sort of spiritualization of materialism. Anyway, be that as it may, I was going to say that the soul forgets who it is or what it is, or it forgets its essence as it gets down to the lower and lower in the material worlds until you reach a crisis, a nadir, a very the deepest point of material, when soul kind of forgets everything. When I say forgets, but soul sort of has a niggling kind of remembrance of something that it has lost, which accounts for its basic existential neurosis or ennui, to put it in existential terms. And so the soul is very, very sort of upset, but it doesn't know why it's upset. And so soul is open, basically, to salvation at this point, or mind liberation, as one might say. And this blue line represents Jesus. Jesus descending into the material lower worlds to try and rescue soul, try and rescue us from materialism and the material world. It's like someone going after their child that's gone missing. I saw a film, I've forgotten its title, where this guy goes after his daughter. His daughter's gone into LA and she's become involved with heroin and snuff movies and hardcore porn and God knows what. And he's got to try and rescue her, and he goes, he's got to try and go into all these sort of dens of iniquity and of sexploitation, and in order to find his daughter and rescue her from perdition and from death, and through her horrible life. So in a way, when Jesus comes down to fetch us back home, and so in my gospel, in my version of gospel anyway, Jesus comes from the wilderness. He just arises, and he comes like Adonis. He comes from God. Stranger God comes into this strange land, crosses the wilderness and just appears among people. And at the first, he becomes an acolyte or a disciple of John the Baptist, and he joins the Baptist's cult. And he's sort of waiting in line to be baptized by John the Baptist. And that moment of baptism, everybody sees the dove descending onto Jesus. And it's obvious that whereas, as John says himself, that he has baptized Jesus in water, in fact, Jesus will baptize man in spirit. So baptism, following John the Baptist, and the actual moment of baptism is very, very important in this version of Christianity, because it's at that point that people have the potential to ascend and to remember their soul, and to remember their true spiritual home in God. And then Jesus goes on with his ministry, and does the Beatitudes and all the sayings and the miracles and what have you. And then at the end of his ministry, he doesn't get sacrificed, he doesn't get crucified, he just simply ascends. First of all, he transfigures, and then afterwards, that's when he reveals the truth, the Gnosis about his true nature, which is spiritual. And then after that, he ascends to go back to the realm, the transcendental realm. And by his ascension, by his ministry, his transfiguration, his ascension, and his baptism, we follow Jesus back to the transcendental realm. So we remember ourselves. The soul begins to remember its true nature, which is spiritual rather than material. So we have a kind of, so for this version of Christianity, baptism is the key thing. It's the key moment, because you're taken down, and the grail basically is the font in which the adult is baptized. So you have the font here, and the water, which represents the Jordan, and you are taken into the water by the minister, full immersion, and you come out of the water, and this represents your soul's descent into the material world. And when you come out of the water again, helped by taken out of the water by the minister, that represents Jesus taking you out of the lower worlds and and ascending to the higher realms. So So baptism, adult baptism by total immersion in this font, in this Holy Grail. So the Holy Grail is not a receptacle for Jesus's blood; it's a receptacle for the water, which represents your transformation, your initiation into Christian mysteries. And so that's kind of the bare bones of a gospel that might be considered to be Gnostic, based on Gnostic assumptions about matter and spirit, and about there being two gods, one of matter, one of spirit, and of the capture of soul by the demiurge and captivity within this material realm, and the forgetting process that soul goes through, except that soul doesn't. It has a nagging feeling that it's forgotten something it should never have forgotten, and has lost something which it should never have lost. And that's the sort of the basis of human neurosis, as it were, and suffering. And then when we are baptized into Jesus, into Christ, we are at that moment we remember we have a soul awareness. A soul awareness begins anyway. To initiate means to begin, and we begin the process of remembering who we are, and that we are soul, and that we are not this or that. We are just soul, and we are soul, and God is the supreme object of devotion in the universe. So baptism would be a very, very key ritual in this version of Christianity. And indeed, and it's a sort of transference from John to Jesus. Well, but John and Jesus would be the two pillars, if you like, of this religion, because John brings you to the font, and then baptizes you, and then when you emerge from the baptismal water, well, that's Jesus bringing you out. So if you like, John hands you over to Jesus, if you like. So you've got one spiritual entity sort of handing you over to another spiritual entity, and John would be as much a spiritual entity or as important in this Christianity as Jesus, in fact. Um, and so basically, and then of course, you would celebrate the Transfiguration, and you'd celebrate the ascension of Jesus at the end of his ministry. But at no point does he actually die, and at no point is he actually born. But you're going to say, well, was Jesus flesh? Yes, he was flesh, but he is flesh that appears from nowhere, from the ethers, and to the ethers, this flesh goes back, and this flesh, being the logos made flesh, of course, is a not a facsimile so much as being a sort of, well, I suppose the Gnostics say spiritual apparition, but even that's not a correct word, really. I don't know what word you possibly could use at this point, really. But at any rate, in this version of the gospel, there is no birth story, there is no passion, there is no resurrection, and all references to these three elements are removed from the gospel. And what you actually have is the baptism, and the transfiguration and the ascension of Jesus, and Jesus's ministry in between, that kind of thing. So that's sort of basis of a gospel which you could actually create. But of course, in no way are you criticizing the gospels that exist now, or Orthodox Christianity. Because some people are very upset if you came up with a gospel like this, as indeed they were very upset with Marcion for creating a similar gospel, in the 5th century. I hope I got that right. Anyway, and people were very upset with Marcion, very upset and called him a devil and all this kind of stuff and evil and so they would be very upset with you. So, but you're not saying that Orthodox Christianity is wrong at all. Um, you're just because you're just asking questions and you're just creating a theological basis which is not based on the sacrifice of Jesus, because the concept of sacrifice and new covenant is taken away from this version of Christianity. So I thought I'd just leave this kind of bare bones ramble through just my sort of thoughts as they have matured as a result of creating this channel, which as I said, this channel is a thought tank, a think tank about Gnosticism, and I'd welcome any comments that anybody has on what I've just said. Thank you very much for watching, and bye for now.